Imagine finding a quiet, beautiful pastoral romance novel just sort of tucked right into the middle of a gritty apocalyptic war
Oh,
series.
yeah, it's an incredibly jarring contrast.
It really is. That is the Book of Ruth. Welcome to today's Deep Dives, and before we descend into this fascinating ancient world with you, may God deeply bless your day today, and may a divine blessing rest upon your entire week ahead.
Yes, absolutely. We are thrilled you're joining us to sift through two really rich sources today.
Right, the comprehensive study Bible introductions to the Book of Ruth from both the Holman and the NAA editions.
And it's just a remarkable piece of literature. I mean, the text itself is incredibly brief.
It's what, just 4 short chapters?
Exactly, just four. But the theological and historical implications are staggering. You think you're sitting down to read a simple rural idyll about an agrarian family just trying to survive.
Right.
But you were actually reading a masterclass in loyalty, a really dramatic structural comedy, and the hidden starting point for a royal lineage that completely altered the course of human history.
Which is huge. But to even begin to appreciate how bright and, well, idealized this specific story is, we really have to look at the shadow surrounding it first.
They really do.
The sources are very clear that you just cannot understand Ruth without first understanding the profound darkness of the historical era where it's set. I mean, the opening line of the book drops us right into this period known as the Days of the Judges.
And if you want to understand the days of the judges, you basically need to understand systemic chaos.
Yeah.
When the NAA introduction unpacks this era, it highlights a period of severe social, political, and religious disorder in Israel. The defining repeated refrain of this entire era, like the tagline for the time, is that everyone did what was right in their own eyes.
Which, in practical terms means what exactly? Because doing what is right in your own eyes today might just mean you have a very personalized moral code. You do you,
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
But in the ancient Near East, I imagine that translates to just absolute anarchy.
That is a much more accurate picture, yes. There is no centralized leadership at all. There was no moral compass. I mean, we are talking about tribal warfare, despotism, widespread violence,
Wow.
and rampant idolatry. It is a time of extreme moral bankruptcy. And in the worldview of ancient Israel, that moral bankruptcy has direct physical consequences.
So it's not just a spiritual issue for them.
Not at all. The Holman source points out that during this time, a severe famine strikes the region of Judah.
Let's pause on that for a second, because I think the modern mind immediately jumps to, meteorology.
Oh, sure.
We think, okay, there was a drought, a shift in weather patterns, El Nino, whatever. But the ancient Israelite wouldn't have seen it that way at all, would they?
Definitely not.
Right.
You have to look at this through the lens of ancient covenant theology. The Israelites believed their relationship with God was tied directly to the health of the physical land.
Right, the promised land.
Exactly. The covenant essentially stated that obedience brought agricultural abundance and widespread disobedience, like the massive idolatry we see in Judges that brought ecological collapse.
So it's cause and effect.
Very much so. The famine wasn't just bad weather. It was viewed as the land itself reacting to the moral decay of the people.
So the situation is just incredibly bleak. You have violence in the streets and empty grain silos. And this forces a man named Elimelech and his wife Naomi to make a really desperate choice.
A terrible choice, really.
Yeah, they decide to flee their hometown of Bethlehem, which, by the way, carries a heavy dose of irony, since Bethlehem literally translates to house of bread.
Yeah, the house of bread is empty.
Right. So they migrate to the neighboring land of Moab just to find food.
And that migration, that is a massive red flag in the narrative.
Yeah.
They're just moving to the next county over.
Right.
To fully grasp the tension here, you have to realize that Israel and Moab were historic, bitter enemies. I mean, the Moabites originated from the incestuous lineage of Lot, and throughout the period of the Judges, they frequently oppressed the Israelites.
So they were the bad guys, essentially, in the Israelite mindset.
Exactly. So for an Israelite family to seek refuge in Moab, it means they have hit absolute rock bottom. They are desperate.
It is an act of pure desperation. And honestly, it does not pay off at all. The sources detail how the tragedy rapidly compounds. First, Elimelech dies in this foreign land.
Leaving Naomi alone.
Right. Naomi is left with her 2 sons, who then end up marrying Moabite women, Orpah and Ruth. But then, and this is just devastating, about 10 years later, both of Naomi's sons die as well. And no grandchildren are born.
Which leaves Naomi utterly destitute. I mean, put yourself in Naomi's shoes for just a moment. She's an aging woman in a highly patriarchal agrarian society.
Where you need a man to survive.
Exactly. Your survival depends entirely on the protection of a husband or the provision of sons. She has neither. She is in a hostile foreign land. She is, in the most profound sense of the word, empty.
Completely empty.
And this introduces what the NAA Bible identifies as the underlying literary structure of the entire book, which is the classic U-shaped comedy.
Okay, I have to admit, calling a story about three starving, grieving widows a comedy feels completely counterintuitive to me.
It sounds totally wrong.
Yeah, it sounds like a tragedy.
In modern vernacular, absolutely. We hear comedy and we expect jokes, we expect a sitcom. But in classical literary terms, a U-shaped comedy refers strictly to the shape of the narrative arc.
Okay, so map that out for us.
So the story starts at the top left of the U, that's state of normalcy or equilibrium back in Bethlehem. Then it plunges downward into profound tragedy, death, famine, and exile. It hits the absolute bottom of the pit.
Which is where Naomi is right now in Moab.
Exactly. The rest of the book, the right side of the U, is the grueling, gradual climb back up. The characters overcome massive obstacles to eventually reach a joyful, full, and abundant resolution at the top right of the U.
That makes perfect sense, actually. It's that contrast we mentioned earlier. You have the Book of Judges, which is just blood, guts, and betrayal, this downward spiral of societal collapse.
A very dark backdrop.
Right, and then you turn the page to Ruth. It's this intimate, domestic story of survival told largely from a woman's perspective. It highlights quiet, feminine values in an incredibly violent patriarchal world.
The Holman source actually notes how deliberate that contrast is. After trudging through the dark, depressing realities of Judges, reading Ruth is, it's like stepping out of a suffocating room into fresh air.
Wow, yeah.
But the climb out of that pit doesn't start with military conquests or a king arriving on a chariot to save the day. The rescue is initiated by a very specific, quiet type of human action that the Hebrew text calls hesed.
But, as beautiful as the concept of hesed is, I think we need to look at the reality of Naomi's mindset first before she experiences it.
Oh, absolutely. She is not in a good place.
No. When she finally decides to trudge back to Bethlehem, she is a completely broken woman. She literally tells the people in her hometown, "Don't call me Naomi anymore, call me Mara," which means bitter.
Right.
She believes the Almighty has brought disaster upon her. She thinks her story is just over.
She thinks she is returning completely empty. But what she completely underestimates is the subtle nature of God's grace. That grace doesn't come roaring out of the clouds in a thunderstorm.
Right, no parting of the Red Sea here.
Exactly. It arrives disguised in the actions of her Moabite daughter-in-law, Ruth. Before they cross back into Israel, Naomi gives her daughters-in-law the most logical advice possible. Go back to your own mother's houses.
Which makes sense.
It does. Find new husbands in your own culture. You're young enough. Orpah eventually takes the advice, which is completely understandable, but Ruth refuses. And the sources highlight this refusal as the ultimate display of hesed.
Let's drill down into that word, because I don't think a simple English translation of, kindness really does it justice at all.
It really doesn't. Hesed is one of the most complex, untranslatable words in the Hebrew Bible. It is often rendered as covenant faithfulness, benevolence, or loyal love.
Loyal love, I like that.
It is a profound, stubborn, active commitment to the well-being of another person, and it almost always involves great personal sacrifice.
I want to push back on this for a second and just think about how deeply alien this level of hesed feels today. I mean, if we are completely honest, we live in a culture where relationships are heavily transactional.
Oh, without a doubt.
We constantly evaluate. What am I getting out of this connection? Is this a good investment of my time or my emotional energy? Ruth, sticking with Naomi, defies all economic and social logic.
Completely.
She is willingly giving up the protection of her own family, any guaranteed chance to remarry, and her own cultural security, all to tie herself to a destitute, bitter woman traveling back to a country that harbors deep prejudice against Moabites.
It's honestly staggering.
It really is. It is loyalty without fine print.
It is a radical, almost reckless choice, and it flips the narrative on its head. The Holman source draws a brilliant parallel here, actually comparing Naomi's journey to the New Testament parable of the prodigal son.
Wait, how does that parallel work? Because Naomi didn't demand an inheritance and squander it on wild living or anything like that.
No, the parallel lies in the trajectory of the search for abundance. Elimelech's family leaves the geographic land where God promised to bless his people, heading into foreign territory to find physical security.
Oh, I see.
It's much like the prodigal son leaving the father's house to find his own way, and the result in both stories is complete emptiness.
They both end up with nothing.
Exactly. But just like the father who runs to welcome the returning son, God uses Naomi's bitter return to replace her emptiness with an entirely new, unexpected abundance. And the vehicle he uses to deliver that abundance is Ruth says.
Okay, but as inspiring as Ruth's personal loyalty is, you can't eat loyalty.
Very true.
We have to deal with the brutal mechanics of the ancient world. They are two unprotected widows in an agrarian society. Good intentions won't put barley on the table. To actually survive, they needed a structural loophole, a legal rescue.
Yes, they needed someone to intervene.
Which brings us to the harvest fields of Bethlehem and a man named Boaz.
To understand how this rescue happens, we have to look at the intersection of extreme poverty and ancient Israelite law. Specifically, the sources focus on two intertwined concepts: the family redeemer and liberate marriage.
Okay, let's walk through this slowly, because to a modern listener, these concepts can sound completely bizarre or even a bit problematic. First, how are they getting food before Boaz even enters the picture?
So they're relying on a welfare system built into the law of Moses called gleaning. Landowners were commanded not to harvest the very edges of their fields and not to go back a second time to pick up dropped grain.
Leaving the scraps, essentially.
Basically, that leftover produce was legally reserved for the poor, the widow, and the foreigner. So Ruth volunteers to go glean.
Which sounds nice on paper, but I imagine it was incredibly dangerous. You have a young, foreign widow, without any male protection, walking into fields full of hungry laborers in an era where, again, everyone did what was right in their own eyes.
Right. The threat of assault or exploitation must have been massive. The vulnerability is just absolute.
But she happens to end up in a field owned by Boaz.
Yes. And when Naomi finds out, the narrative totally shifts.
Yeah.
Because Boaz isn't just a wealthy landowner. He actually qualifies as a Gaul.
The family redeemer.
Exactly. The Gaul was a designated close male relative whose legal duty was to step in when a family member fell into severe systemic poverty.
Yeah.
If an Israelite had to sell their ancestral land to survive or sell themselves into servitude to pay a debt, the Gaul was supposed to buy back the property or pay the debt.
So what was the ultimate goal of that?
The goal was to ensure that land and people wouldn't be perpetually lost to the family line.
Okay, so it is a mechanism to keep wealth and legacy intact within the clan, sort of preventing a cycle of generational poverty.
Yes, exactly. Now combine that property law with the concept of levirate marriage.
Which sounds intense.
It does. The NWA source explains that this term stems from the Latin word levar, meaning husband's brother. If a man died without leaving a male heir to inherit his property and carry on his name, it was expected that his brother, or a very close relative, would marry the widow.
To produce an heir.
Right. The first child born of that union would legally be considered the heir of the deceased husband, ensuring his name wasn't blotted out of history.
I think we really need a major perspective shift here. Because, to modern ears, combining an ancient property transaction with what is essentially an arranged marriage sounds like awful bureaucratic red tape. Some might even view it as highly oppressive, like a woman being passed along as part of a real estate deal.
It definitely clashes with modern individualism. There's no denying that.
Yeah.
But you really have to judge the law by the context of its time.
Right. Think about how our modern society handles systemic poverty today. We rely on government welfare, social security, pension plans. They had literally none of that.
None.
In the chaotic culture of the judges, the system wasn't oppressive. It was the ultimate social safety net. It was a literal rescue mission.
It really was.
It meant that the most vulnerable people in society weren't just tossed aside to starve. It legally required the wealthy and secure to take on the financial and social burdens of the broken people in their family tree.
And Boaz executes this role flawlessly. The sources emphasize that Boaz is a rarity in biblical narratives. He is a uniformly positive, healthy male figure.
A good guy in an era of really bad guys.
Exactly. He doesn't take advantage of Ruth's vulnerability in the field. He provides her with food and physical protection. He is really the human personification of God's own kindness. The narrative beautifully pairs Ruth's virtuous femininity with Boaz's strong, protective masculinity.
But he still has to follow the law, right? He doesn't just declare them rescued. There is a whole legal process he has to navigate.
Oh, yes. It happens at the city gate, which was the ancient equivalent of a courthouse. Boaz gathers the town elders and publicly secures the right to buy back Naomi's land and take Ruth as his wife, ensuring the lineage of Naomi's dead husband will continue.
And that changes everything for them.
Completely. The NAA source highlights how this legal transaction just completely reverses their fortunes. They go from death to life, from seeking rest to finding it, from bitterness to joy, and from utterly empty to completely full. The U-shaped comedy reaches its joyful, triumphant peak.
So, Boaz's legal rescue mission at the city gate saved two widows from poverty. But here is where we need to zoom out and look at the macro level, because by stepping into this redeemer role, Boaz unknowingly rescued a royal bloodline.
It's amazing to think about.
It is a theological domino effect that would literally shape human history.
And this brings us to the overarching theme of hidden providence. Both study Bibles emphasize this point heavily. When you read a book like, say, Exodus, God's intervention is loud and undeniable. You have a sea parting in half, a pillar of fire, plagues wiping out a nation.
Right, there are no burning bushes in the barley fields of Bethlehem.
None at all. In fact, the narrator of Ruth only directly attributes two specific actions to God in the entire book.
What are they?
First, in chapter 1, God provides food, ending the famine. And second, at the very end of the book, God grants Ruth conception so she can bear a son. Everything else in the story, the chance meeting in the field, Ruth's risky midnight conversation with Boaz at the threshing floor, the legal transaction at the gate, it all happens entirely through the ordinary, uncoerced decisions of human beings.
But the text is clear that God's sovereignty is actively weaving all those ordinary decisions together. The theological message is that God is working providentially behind the scenes, utilizing the human kindness, the haste of Ruth and Boaz, to accomplish a grand, historic purpose.
And we see that purpose revealed in the final verses. The book ends with a genealogy. Now, modern readers tend to let their eyes glaze over when they hit a list of names.
Well, guilty as charged.
Yep, right. But this genealogy is the punchline of the entire narrative. Ruth gives birth to a son named Obed. Obed becomes the father of Jesse, and Jesse becomes the father of King David.
King David, the shepherd boy who fights Goliath, the greatest king in Israel's history, the one who unites the kingdom.
Which also provides a massive clue about when this book was actually written. The sources note that while rabbinic tradition and the Talmud attributes the writing of the book to the prophet Samuel, that timeline doesn't really hold up.
Because Samuel died before David became king, right?
Exactly. The specific mention of David's genealogy indicates the book had to be written during or after David's ascension to the throne, around 1010 BC, essentially serving as an apologetic to explain his providential ancestry.
Let's talk about the scandal of that ancestry for a second. The fact that Ruth is a Moabite isn't just a minor detail, it is deeply shocking. You have the greatest king of Israel, the standard by which all future kings are measured, and his great-grandmother is from a despised enemy nation.
It is completely revolutionary. She is incorporated into God's people, not by her ethnic bloodline, but entirely by her faith and her faithful actions.
Wow.
Her central presence in the royal lineage proves that the family of promise was never meant to be a closed, exclusive club for one ethnicity. It answers questions that later generations might have raised about the legitimacy of David's throne, given his Moabite roots, boldly declaring that God's plan of redemption is universally inclusive.
And that lineage doesn't just stop at David's throne, does it?
No, it extends much further into salvation history. The Holman and NAA sources both draw the line straight to the New Testament, emphasizing that this genealogy ultimately leads to Jesus Christ.
The ultimate redeemer.
Precisely. Jesus is presented as the ultimate redeemer, the final goal, who steps in to pay the ultimate price so that wandering, empty people can finally find rest.
It's like the ultimate historical butterfly effect. We have journeyed from starvation and bitter grief in the hostile land of Moab, all the way to the establishment of a global spiritual kingdom. And it is all built on the quiet loyalty of a foreign daughter-in-law and the integrity of a local farmer. It profoundly reframes how we view our daily choices.
It really does. If we connect this ancient text to our modern reality, it raises a critical point for all of us regarding how we view divine action.
How so?
Well, we are so often conditioned to look for massive, earth-shattering miracles to prove that God is at work in our lives or in our society. We want the loud confirmation. We want the sea to part.
We want the burning bush.
Right. But the Book of Ruth suggests something far more intimate and perhaps more challenging. It suggests that the arc of history is actually being shaped right now by ordinary people making quiet, everyday choices to be kind.
Yeah.
It is shaped by people choosing to show hands, to remain fiercely loyal when it would be so much easier and so much more economically viable to just walk away.
That is such a powerful framework to carry with us. We rarely know the long-term impact of our actions. What ordinary act of loyalty or kindness in your own life might be setting up a future or a domino effect that you cannot even see yet? It is something to seriously ponder as you navigate your week.
Absolutely.
Well, that brings us to the end of today's deep dive into the Book of Ruth. Thank you so much for exploring this rich, beautiful narrative with us. We are incredibly glad you took the time to listen. Goodbye for now, and remember, God blesses all of you listening today. Take care.